Andy Farrell has named his Ireland team to face Italy, and he has wielded the axe, making 6 alterations to his starting team for this Saturday's game. And we will discuss them all on today's extra episode of the Left Wing podcast. Will Slattery here, delighted to be joined by regular guest Cian Tracey. Cian, how are things?
Good, Will. How are we?
I'm doing very well. Very interesting team selection. I think what you teed it up as Andy Farrell is facing his most important Ireland team selection yet. And there's certainly a sense that this is a tipping point potentially in this World Cup cycle, and just because of some moving parts. Before we get into it, our rugby coverage on the Left Wing podcast is sponsored by Energia. Energia sponsors rugby in Ireland at all levels at grassroots with the Energia AIL and is official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht and the Irish men's and women's teams. To learn more about Energia's rugby partnerships and find out about their exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. So the changes to the team, let's go through it quickly, Cian, and get your thoughts there. Back three, Jamie Osborne. Both wings have been removed. Tommy O'Brien gone, Jacob Stockdale gone, neither man in the 23. Robert Balakoon comes in on the right wing, James Lowe on the left wing. McCluskey and Gary Ringrose stay in the centres. Sam Prendergast retained at out half. Craig Casey in for Jamison Gibson Park. He is on the bench. Front row is unchanged with Jeremy Loughman, Dan Sheehan and Thomas Clarkson. Joe McCarthy still in the team. There was a bit of talk that potentially his discipline against France might count against him, but he has been retained as well. James Ryan is in for Tadhg Byrne, who is also on the bench. And 2 changes in the back row. Cormac Isichuku is in at number 6. Cian Prendergast is out of the 23. Jack Conan is in at number 8. And Caelan Doris shifts to number 7. Josh van der Flier, another one who is completely removed from the 23. Then the replacements, Ronan Kelleher, Tom O'Toole, who was actually named as the replacement loosehead prop, interestingly enough. Ty Furlong back from injury. Tadhg Byrne, Edwin Edogbo in line for his debut. Nick Timoney didn't get into the starting team despite that good performance off the bench against France. Then we have Jamison Gibson Park and Jack Crowley, a 6-2 split there. So lots of change. I know it was forecasted there might be some movement, but after kind of teeing up that this was a really important team selection for Andy Farrell, now that you've seen what he has unveiled for this game against Italy on Saturday, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I hope you know what I meant by most important, because certainly I got a few comments online that I was over egging the pudding, but I obviously didn't mean that this is the biggest game of Andy Farrell's tenure, but I just felt that he had a real chance to make a statement that not just could count for the rest of the Six Nations, Will, but also in terms of what's to come over the next year and a half, obviously with one eye on the World Cup. And to be fair, I think Andy Farrell, you put it well there, has wielded the axe. Now, he could point to the fact that, you know, there's one less break weekend and Twickenham is coming next week. But realistically, I think a lot of players who you outlined there who aren't in the 23 have paid a heavy price for their poor performances in some instances in Paris last week. And I think the guys who Andy Farrell has brought in, there's real excitement. Like even in our post-match pod that we did at the Stade de France last week, we would have flagged guys like Robert Balakoon and Cormac Isichuku who've been excellent in a really good Ulster team this season, that they could provide a real point of difference. And I think it's a really exciting selection actually by Andy Farrell, and I think it sends out, in most instances, I'm sure we can get onto it. You mentioned Nick Timoney. I think he's particularly unlucky, but I think in most instances it sends out a really strong message to certain guys that lack of intent or whatever won't be tolerated at this level.
Yeah, that's the big thing to me, and we touched on it on our show on Tuesday. Like when Andy Farrell goes out after the France game and makes such a kind of a stark statement about the side's lack of intent, and then you're obviously very eagerly waiting to see who is removed from the team. And the fact that Byrne and Gibson Park are on the bench, I look at that more as 2 guys kind of being rested, managed, rotated, yeah. But there's 4 guys not in the squad at all. So in effect, you know, you're kind of looking at what he's saying and looking at what he's doing. You're saying he is pointing the finger at Jacob Stockdale, Tommy O'Brien, 2 guys who are kind of chiefly responsible in some instances, obviously, for the aerial battle going awry. And then he's going to the pack and saying, my 2 flankers, Cian Prendergast and Josh van der Flier, I'm blaming you. Really, like I know that can kind of be a rudimentary way of looking at it, but in effect, that's kind of how you have to in some ways. Like 4 guys have been completely removed from the 23 right after Andy Farrell has questioned the kind of the mindset of the squad. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think like those guys, like you mentioned, like let's start in the back 3. Like, I mean, Jacob Stockdale and Tommy O'Brien were completely outplayed. Tommy O'Brien got taken off early, and this is probably the first, apart from the injuries that he's had across the course of his career, this is probably the first sort of hiccup that he's hit, because since he's broken into the team in Leinster, he's been excellent. He made his Ireland debut, obviously, last season as well. But I think we just saw a difference in sort of pace, dynamism, intent, to use that word, in what we saw from the French back three. I think Jacob Stockdale as well was too passive, I felt, in a lot of the aerial contests. Like, he's a big man, but he just doesn't use his height and his power, for me, enough. And I know some people will point to, well, James Lowe hasn't exactly been tearing up threes either, but I just don't think Jacob Stockdale did enough last week. Now, that said, I did think he grew into the game, and he actually got better when the bench came on, when it looked like he was going to be taken off. Tommy O'Brien obviously got taken off early. I think it makes sense to keep Jamie Osborne at fullback. I think Farrell's options are pretty limited. I know, was it you were kind of championing maybe Jack Crowley to get a start there? I'm not sure if that was going to be a realistic runner, to be honest, especially how strongly Farrell kind of poo-pooed the notion of that Ireland looked better last week when they had the two playmakers in terms of Crowley and Prendergast on the pitch at the same time. He was really quick to kind of pour cold water on that, so I really wasn't expecting that to be a runner this week. But let's focus on particularly Robert Balakoon. Like, this is a guy who, God, he would have a lot more caps at this stage if his body had played ball. A bit like Tommy O'Brien, probably. He's just been so unfortunate with injuries. But I was watching him in Portugal last week, Will, in training, and he's a specimen of an athlete. Like, we can see that in the way he moves and the way he changes pace, and he moves through the gears when he's fully fit and firing. And I think Andy Farrell has always picked Robert Balakoon when he's been fit, but again, it's just that he hasn't got that clean run. But this guy has the potential to completely, change and adapt the dynamic of the back three. He's a big, tall, rangy winger. He's an excellent defender, which I think gets spoken about a lot because he is so rapid. So I'm very excited to see what he'll bring to the back three. And look, James Lowe has had the kick up the ass that he probably needed last week. I would expect him to come in with a real fire under him and deliver a big performance, because his form has been quite poor for a while. I don't think he had a great Lions tour. He hasn't had a great season, but maybe this is the spark that he needs. And again, I just didn't feel Stockdale did enough to keep his place in the team. So I'm excited to see how that back three gel.
The funny thing is about Tommy O'Brien is that, there was a lot of talk about guys not in form and playing your way into form. He was probably one of the few players who arrived actually having had a really good season. That was the reason he was kind of picked, but obviously it didn't translate it. You could. The only person who was really safe in my eyes, or who would have had a complaint if they were dropped, was Stuart McCluskey. Anyone else, if they had been dropped, I wouldn't have surprised me. I actually don't think anyone else was safe after last weekend. So there was obviously, as you say, going to be some change. The wings are interesting because, I don't associate Balakoon and Lowe's strengths as being in the air. I think, as you outlined there, they're good at some other things. And they obviously
I don't know, just to come in on that, I don't think we're going to see the same game.
Well, that's my point. The fact that he's made these changes, because you're thinking 2 weeks down the line as well in Twickenham, when the English are so good in the air, and it's the game plan to maybe not take them on their biggest strengths and to kind of play a different way. So I'll be very interested to see how Ireland approach the game with the ball, because I think we were all in agreement that Ireland kicked well. It was just that they got no change out of it. So I wonder if this selection means they won't kick as much, because these two guys, it wouldn't be their strength. Albeit the wingers last week, potentially it was meant to be more of a strength on paper, but if they weren't able to convert it, it's not really worth much.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I'm actually doing a big piece on this at the moment in terms of Ireland trying to find the right balance between, I suppose, moving in the direction of the aerial game that the likes of South Africa, England and France, and adding a counter-attacking threat. But I think they're kind of caught between two stools and not wanting to completely move away from what they were doing in the past. But again, I think the game plan last week in Paris was designed for that match specifically. And I agree with you. I think Gibson Park's kicking was actually pretty good. It was a horrible night in Paris. It made sense. It was just that Ireland didn't win many of those collisions. So I think obviously we'll get on and talk about the pack, Will, but I agree with you in terms of the strengths of Balakoon and Lowe. But I think this is a team at 23 that's picked to run over Italy. And even I think back to Menoncello's try against Scotland last week. Italy were excellent in the air, and I would imagine that they were
claimed a great ball, didn't he, in the build-up?
Unbelievable take that was. So I would imagine Italy will probably be going to the air quite a bit in Dublin on Saturday. So like the back three are still going to be tested, whether it's their strengths or not. But when Ireland have the ball, I'd be shocked if they're going to kick it as many contestables as they did last week.
Yeah, and then I suppose the rest of the back line, McCluskey, Ringrose, I didn't foresee any changes there. Sam Prendergast picked again. I think everyone seemed to be in agreement that he's likely to get these 3 matches, this 3-match block potentially. Like, I know there's a lot of debate about his performance and whether he deserves it, but certainly I expected to see him back in the team, just knowing or kind of following Andy Farrell's selections. And Craig Casey, interesting that he gets the opportunity, playing alongside Sam Prendergast. What do you make of that selection? How those 2 halfbacks will gel?
Yeah, I think I was the only one in our jury who didn't quite agree with that Sam Prendergast logic.
But did you not? I think you still kept him, did you not? Or did you drop him?
No, I had Jack Crowley. I don't want to get bogged down in this again, but I just, like, taking last week's game in isolation, I just didn't think Sam Prendergast had a good game, and like the defensive issues are still there, and he did make a lot of tackles as well, but it was actually the brain farts really that concerned me. Like, he kind of led to France 2 tries in terms of the first one.
The one over the dead ball. I actually think the one over the dead ball line's a lot worse. Like, that one... Like, it actually hasn't been spoken about quite as much. I feel like the fly hack is getting a lot of criticism, but catching that ball on the 5-metre line as he does, and then running it over the end line and giving Tommy O'Brien's probably going to be sitting at home watching this game this weekend, being like, "I'm being dropped."
Yeah. So like, taking that game in isolation, I just didn't think he did enough to warrant keeping his place. But I fully expected Andy Farrell to do it. Now, it's not as if Jack Crowley's form has been brilliant for Munster this season, and that is part of the issue here. So yeah, like, I still think Crowley is very much a live contender. Like, even possibly for Twickenham next week, when you think of how different that game's going to be in terms of England's power runners in the air and all that. I would fully agree with your sort of assessment in terms of Gibson Park and Tadhg Byrne. I can't even remember Tadhg Byrne being on the Ireland bench in too many games. I think that probably is more of a kind of rest and rotation, and I think Craig Casey will add huge energy, and we're so used to seeing him with Jack Crowley that for Munster, and they kind of tend to play for Ireland as far as I can remember for a lot of their caps, certainly. So I'm really excited to see how Casey and Prendergast go from the start. Like I said, I think Casey will give you a bit of injection of something different, and I don't think Gibson Park played as poorly as a lot of people made out. I know he fell off a couple of tackles and DuPont ragdolled him. That was pretty unlike him. But in terms of the kicking, he was carrying out the game plan that they had been working on in Portugal for a week and a half.
I agree with you.
I don't think it's fair to criticise him for that at all.
Yeah, I think I saw like people blaming the kicking game on him. I thought he executed those kicks well, and like the team wasn't getting a huge amount of go for it, so he wasn't able to be his kind of zippy self. But I didn't think his passing was particularly poor. Although there was one off a line out early. Was it kind of in the build up to Sam Prendergast's offload, maybe, where he throws a pass into midfield and it isn't as crisp and is kind of not hitting him in the kind of classic TV screen as you'd like. But I do still reckon that he is first choice. The pack then is really interesting. Like, I know you were talking to Joe McCarthy, or you were at the press conference when he was reflecting on his ill discipline from last week. Like, I was definitely of one of those people saying I would drop him because he hasn't learned his lesson. You mentioned in that piece, like, he was dropped after the French game last year for the Italy game onto the bench. Here we are again. I read the quotes. I'd be interested to know how he was delivering them. Like, what was your sense talking to him and listening to him talk about his discipline last week and how he can't be giving those away? Like, did you kind of buy what he was selling, like, or did it sound like he was just trotting this out because that's what he's meant to say? Did you actually kind of like listen to him? Were you like, oh yeah, he's learning this lesson, or what was your sense?
Yeah, I did to be honest. Now, I know obviously you can look back and him pulling Ramos back in the game last year, which obviously cost him his place in the team the following week, like you said, for Rome. But yeah, I don't know, Will. Like, I just feel like at times, like, it was really daft, and I'm not excusing it at all, as in the penalty that he gave away. But I just feel, unless you're kind of in that moment and in, the Stade de France and 80,000 French people roaring, your heart rate is going through the roof, that it might be easier said than done to make a rash decision, particularly for a guy who plays on the edge. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but you absolutely don't want to take that out of Joe McCarthy's game. And look, I think Joe McCarthy, since like he was excellent last season, was having a really good Lions tour before he got injured, and he's been brilliant for Leinster this season as well. I personally wasn't of the opinion that he should have been dropped, because I think Ireland need to win the game this weekend, and I think of the Irish players in the country this year, since he's come back, I think he's been excellent. So I think he's had the rap in the knuckles. I remember even last year he was saying, I think Paul O'Connell had a real kind of stern talking to him after that, the yellow card against France. So I'd imagine it was something similar this week, and I did think he did come across quite genuine, and he's not just flippantly saying, "Oh yeah, I'll learn my lesson." So I think he was quite genuine in that, and I do agree. I have to admit, to start him, I know you wanted to give him a proper rap on the knuckles, but I would imagine that happened behind closed doors without dropping him.
Yeah, no, it's good to get your perspective, because I was reading that piece today and I was curious as to like how it was coming across, because you read the quotes and it's hard to get a sense of.
Yeah, and he's a pretty genuine fella, like yeah. I would have to say, like, and I think he knows, like, I would imagine the second that he gave away that penalty, he's thinking, oh no, what have I just done?
The ball was so, I actually would have almost more not sympathy. You rush your blood to the head. The Ramos one last year was almost more of that, because the ball was in play, there was a break being made, and he just kind of threw a hand out. This time the ball was clearly embedded in the ruck, and he just comes around and like tackles the guy playing it. I'm like, I don't know what play he's expecting to make there. Like, that's
my theory, Will, having watched it back a couple of times, was that because it was Michael Guillard who was having an unbelievable game.
I want to put a hit in.
I have a feeling there was an element of that, and he knew he was trading a fine line between whether it was in or out, but he was going to land a shot on one of their guys who was playing brilliant, and obviously he went on to get man of the match. That was sort of I didn't think that at the time, but when I was watching it back and trying to think what was going through Joe McCarthy's head at the time, I wonder if there was an element of that, because he would have been sent out, Joe McCarthy would have, to do exactly what Guillard did for France. He was exceptional, I thought, last week. And I think there was a bit of it, like, trying to leave one on him, and he just got the timing completely wrong. So that's what I would imagine was going through his head, because it wasn't like he took out Dupont at the base of the ruck.
You should have asked him that. You sure you had the opportunity? You could have asked him that exact question. We'll never know.
What was going through your head, Joe?
No, or did you want to put a hit on Guillard? Like, I don't, yeah, that would have been a good thing to ask him. Then that back row, very interesting. Not sure if this was flagged necessarily, although Doris at 7 has been something that's been tried and something that people have mooted to get himself and Conan on the field, because we haven't seen him on the pitch starting that much. I was mentioning during the week that those two La Rochelle finals, when there was a sense that if you play them both at the same time, I think people thought that like you weren't getting the best out of either of them. That it was almost better to like have one starting like Doris in most instances, because he's the captain, and using Conan's power at 8 again off the bench. But Isichuku comes in at number 6. Harsh on Cian Prendergast, but I do really like Isichuku. I think he's a great prospect, and I think this is the right call. Jack Conan at 8, Doris 7, Van der Flier dropped for the first time in God knows how long. You're probably going back to when Will Connors was ahead of him, because even in November when we thought he was dropped, I think Farrell then said he actually had an injury. Was that against Australia? So going back 4 or 5 years almost for the last time he was dropped from an Ireland team. What do you make of that back row selection?
Well, I really like the look at the back 5 if we take that as a whole. And like I was saying earlier, in terms of what I reckon Ireland's game plan will be, like, that is a big, powerful, physical back 5. When you think James Ryan as well, who we kind of just glossed over, he was excellent off the bench last week, and I'm glad he's been rewarded with a start. The same with Jack Conan. I'll come back to Isichuku in a second, because I'm really excited by him. But in the bits that Doris has played at 7, and he's played at 7 for Leinster as well, like, I've never been convinced that it's his best position, and I understand the logic, because you want to get himself and Conan in the same team, but I kind of feel the same when Conan is playing 6 and Doris is 8, or vice versa. The balance of it hasn't always worked quite well, and I think it's telling that when Doris has played 7 in terms of an experiment, they haven't really stuck with it, which to me says a lot. But I think they're really keen for it to work, and that's why we're seeing it again. So I'll be fascinated to see how that goes. I think Jack Conan fully deserves his place in the team. He was part of an excellent bench last week as well. And like, it was only kind of when I was looking back in the stats from last week that Doris, like, in terms of his carries and his tackles, were pretty high. But he didn't have his most effective game, I think. And I didn't think he was going to be dropped from the team at all. But he's one of those players, I think, along with a Dan Sheehan, along with a couple of others. I know he didn't go on the Lions tour, Caelan Doris, but he had a really bad injury, obviously. But he hasn't been at his best, I would say, this season. And he's almost become this nuisance at the breakdown, and I wonder how much of that is in terms of like his role with the Leinster team in terms of making rucks a shit fight, in terms of that's what the lingo that they use. And look, he's still getting on the ball, but he hasn't quite been as dynamic in terms of his footwork, in terms of getting over the gain line. And I'd really like to see that come back into his game, because I think he's always been excellent at the breakdown. But it seems to me that he's so focused on spoiling opposition ball that he isn't quite having the same effect when he's on the ball himself. So I think this is a pretty big game for him, Will, because I think the criticism that Andy Farrell had in terms of like the players lacking intent, I think like Doris would probably reflected on that, and not just himself, but in terms of what he said before the game, what he said in the build-up. He's still relatively new as a captain, but I wonder if he might, think, God, I could have said something different. I could have done something more to get the players in the right frame of mind. Because I know we keep coming back to it, but it was really damning, wasn't it? Especially
it was massively damning. We were chatting about this the other day. Like, if I'm Caelan Doris and I'm hearing Andy Farrell say that the team wasn't right, that reflects on your captaincy as well, and your ability to manage the group. Like, how often did you ever say that on Johnny Sexton, captain team, even on the Peter O'Malley captain team? So I agree, his form hasn't been as good as we're used to. I think Jack Conan's been playing better than him. So if it was a straight shootout between the two at 8, I would have gone with Jack Conan. So and I agree with you on Sheehan as well. Just not that explosivity that we're used to seeing from him. So I'll be watching those two guys very closely this weekend, because I think that they're not that they're playing for their places necessarily, because they're such stars that that these stars have a lot longer leash in a team, and for good reason. They're such good players that if they do turn it on, they're so impactful. But I will be very intrigued to see how they play this weekend.
Just on that, Will, I think like we probably judge those two guys in particular maybe a little bit harsher because of the heights that they've hit for themselves. Like, I mean, Dan Sheehan is one of the best hookers in the world, but he hasn't been playing like that this season. I think he would probably admit that himself. A couple of years ago, Caelan Doris was being spoken about as one of the best number 8s in the world. I don't think he's been anywhere near that in terms of the upper echelon. So I think they've set such a high bar for themselves that I think maybe we judge them a little bit fairly, I would say, but more harshly than they'll say your average sort of international player, if that makes sense.
And they should be judged like that, because, as you say, they are so impactful when they're good that they need to be at that standard for Ireland to be competitive. And I agree with you on Doris. Like, I suppose the hallmark of his game almost is kind of like over the ball, looking at the ref, over the ball, looking at the ref, hands out, oh, no, not doing anything like that. I feel like that's what you kind of take from that's in my mind's eye this season. That's what I'm kind of seeing more when, as you say, like, he's trucking over people, his footwork at the line, like his ability to kind of gain yards after contact is what in the last couple of years would maybe have stood out a little bit more. So interesting, obviously going to number 7, you'd expect he'd be almost more in the thick of it at the breakdown, not less. But I suppose Jack Conan is there to maybe pick up the slack ball carrying wise. I don't know. I don't think there's a better ball carrier. Maybe McCluskey, is really impactful as well in the team. Are we going to come in?
Can we talk about Isichuku?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like a guy who's so much potential, and this is a huge moment for him. Like, that 6 slot is in flux. If he has a big game on Tuesday, he's probably not being shifted for the rest of the championship. Certainly going to Twickenham if he is. Or did I say on Tuesday? Big game on Saturday.
Yeah, we're still so much in the Thursday night Six Nations match mode. Please, no more than
no
ever
Tuesdays
again.
Anyway, whatever the Thursday.
I'm so happy that the match is on Saturday this week, that life feels normal again. Yeah, it's a huge game for Isichuku, and you're right. Like, you look at the profile of player that I think Andy Farrell wants to have in that 6 jersey. Like, Ryan Baird had done brilliantly before he broke his leg a few months ago, and I think Isichuku is very much of the Ryan Baird mould in that he can play in the second row, he can play 6, he is rangy, he's really springy at the line out, and if you get him into open space, he can move. Obviously, he has a 7s background as well, and it's just it's a brilliant story. Like I said, he's one of, is it 5 or 6 maybe Ulster players in the match day 23, which is huge, and it's very much very much deserved.
Recently they had none. Like, it was very recent. They had literally 0 in the match day squad.
And it's just as a side point, Connacht don't have any players in the 23, which is deeply disappointing for them, because like you said, that was Ulster last year and the year before, and you really need all 4 provinces to be providing for the international team. But this is a huge opportunity. Like, if Isichuku goes well, like, I think he can be a real point of difference, Will. Like I said, he's got the physicality, but he's also got the pace as well. It's just about himself, like very similar to Balakoon, that if he can put a run of games together, because his body has just been unfortunately breaking down. Even last week he wasn't fully fit, because I wondered if Farrell would have been tempted to play him in Paris, even from the start in the number 6 jersey. But he came into camp. Remember, he wasn't named in the squad. Initially. He had a toe injury, and then they ended up calling him in, but he wasn't fully fit. So I think had he been fully fit, he might have been ahead of Cian Prendergast even to start in number 6. So I think did a lot of things well last week, but I think it's almost telling that he finds himself completely out of the 23. Obviously, Andy Farrell wasn't happy with what he saw. So I'm really excited, and I'm glad he's playing in a back row with Caelan Doris and Jack Conan, that it's not a rookie back row, if you know what I mean. So now he's been given the best opportunity to put his best foot forward. He's playing with, behind 2 first choice locks essentially as well. I know Tyg Byrne is in the mix too. So I'm very excited. Of all the players, I think himself and Balakoon, I'm really excited to see how they go this weekend.
I agree with you. Very impactful back 5 as well, as you said. Like, so quickly on the replacements bench, and like Ronan Keller, obviously. Tom O'Toole, very interesting. Like Michael Milne, Harry Hart. Like, I thought he was very I thought I would have actually started him. If there was someone moving out here, I'd actually would have started Milne and put O'Toole on the bench. If they really wanted O'Toole on the bench, I would have kept Milne. But what do you make of O'Toole being on the bench as a loose head?
Yeah, so we're talking before Andy Farrell's press conference, and I'm sure he might provide some clarity by the time people are listening to this. But my understanding is that Michael Milne was fully fit and available for selection, because when word started filtering through sort of last night, this morning, that it was going to be Tom O'Toole on the bench, I just was like, okay, Michael Milne must be injured, or there must be something going on. But that doesn't seem to be the case at all. And like, he was excellent off the bench last week, and like, I don't really agree with it, I have to admit, particularly because Tom O'Toole isn't a loose head. I know Ireland are really keen to have a look at him there, but Ulster see him as a tight head, so it's a real kick in the teeth, I think, for Milne, that a guy who doesn't play loosehead is coming in to take his place in the bench. I thought Jeremy Loughman did really well in Paris last week, and it wasn't a reflection on him, but I actually thought Michael Milne could have started this weekend, and he would have deserved a start. It was interesting. When we were in Portugal, we were speaking to Simon Easterby, and we were sort of asking him about the potential of Tom O'Toole playing loosehead against France, because if you remember, in the build-up to that, there was a bit of talk that, he could be the one to slot in there ahead of the 2 Munster props. And Easterby was quite cold on the notion, and it made me think, I know Tom O'Toole is still training there, but it made me think that maybe they're kind of gone off that. But obviously now in reflection, that was purely just with France in mind. So it's a big opportunity for Tom O'Toole. He obviously will cover tight head as well. Tyg Furlong is on the bench as well. Maybe it's to have a little bit of extra cover there if something was to go wrong. But it's a strange one, particularly because Milne went so well last week. And I think it sends out strange enough message to him, if we're being honest. But a great opportunity for Tom O'Toole, who has played at loosehead. I think he played, was it Fiji in 24? He played loosehead for Ireland, and I think he played loosehead against Spain. Did he, for that, in that Ireland 15 game last year, off the top of my head, as well? So it's clearly something that John Fogarty, the Ireland scrum coach, is interested in. But there isn't joined up thinking with Ulster there, so I'm not sure like how much legs this has in terms of like, can you, like, if let's say, Will, it's a Six Nations decider, it's a World Cup quarter final, can you really expect Tom O'Toole to be thrown in at loosehead if he doesn't play there with his club? So a tricky one. What do you think?
I think it's very harsh on Michael Milne. Like, you come off the bench, you play well, you're part of an impactful bench that gets the scoreboard closer, and then you're dropped for a guy who plays tight end. Yeah, as you said, it's been mooted for a while. It'll be interesting, because Italy's scrum was very good against Scotland. Yeah. They destroyed the Scotland scrum in truth. Like, so, not that the Scotland...
Very good against South Africa as well, Will.
Not that the scrum is like this vaunted scrum, but like, perhaps they're picking 2 tight heads. Even South Africa, I think, would balk at picking 2 tight heads, like, exclusively tight heads on the bench to get, like, roll on one. Maybe you play them in, 20 30-20 or something like that, but you would have no loose heads obviously in that case. Interesting. If the scrum doesn't go well and O'Toole is penalised, like I still remember like Beelum transferring over in that like COVID era, no fans against Georgia and not going very well. It's just like my antenna goes up when I see it, and I think we discussed it a while back actually. And yeah, when you were in Portugal, actually, sorry, we were discussing it, and I think we were similarly talking about it then in the way we are now. So yeah, a very interesting one. As you mentioned, Tyke Furlong back is always positive to see. I actually think he's had a good season when he's been on the pitch, but obviously those injuries have curtailed him. Tyke Byrne getting a bit of a break, but he'll be sprung off the bench. I think that's a badly needed kind of stint on the bench just to rest him. I just think. He had such a I think he played almost every game on the Leinster. I think he only missed one game across like up until the test, and obviously he played the test. He might have missed like that midweek game obviously during the test series, but he was very highly used on the Lions tour.
And he also carries Munster on his back as well, particularly at like the run that they had at the end of last season. So I couldn't agree with you more. It's very unusual to see him on the bench because he is one of the first names still on the team sheet. But I think he, even though it's still relatively early-ish in the season, he has looked a little leggy, and I think the break would do him well.
I would have actually given him the weekend off. Honestly, and that's not to say like I don't mean in the sense of like Ireland will beat Italy anyway, albeit they will be like favoured. I actually just think a complete 1 week rest at this stage ahead of Twickenham might have been beneficial, but I suppose on the bench you can still achieve somewhat a bit kind of less physicality. And then I suppose the big bench selection, obviously Timoney's still there, Gibson Park there, Crowley there. A-dogbo in line for his debut. Obviously last week Farrell said the detail, maybe he hadn't quite got up to speed. Italy maybe deemed a more, I suppose, a softer landing for your Six Nations debut, but everyone will be fascinated to see him coming on in the second half.
Yeah, I think a lot was made of kind of that. That was certainly the talk behind the scenes, that A-dogbo wasn't quite ready, that he had to get up to speed. And I know was it you who were talking about it on the left wing, maybe, that, you know, it was a pretty straightforward game plan. But I think we've seen this with Munster as well, that, you know, A-dogbo is still working his way back from back-to-back Achilles injuries. We've seen him, you know, be on the bench in that Cass game. He's tend to play like 45, 50 minutes. So there is an element of still trying to manage him back because like they were just two horrific setbacks he had. And if he had, been thrown in against Paris and it didn't go well, you know, what kind of setback would that have been for him? So I actually didn't have a big issue, I have to admit, in terms of him not playing. I would have loved to have seen him playing in Paris, don't get me wrong, but I didn't have a huge issue with it. And like this week, I even see in sort of the press release quotes that Andy Farrell had that, you know, they're going to try and make it a special day for him. A-dogbo, that is a big thing that Farrell does. So like we're speaking on Thursday, like usually what happens is at the team hotel this evening, the debutant's family will be invited in to present the jersey. So you'd imagine that will happen tonight. A-dogbo's family will be in there. Andy Farrell will get a chance to see his younger brother Sean A-dogbo, who is coming very fast down the tracks behind him. He's been excellent for Munster in a couple of games that he's played. So I think this makes sense. I think he's a young guy. He's had terrible injuries, like I said, and he could be a big player, pardon the pun, 127 kg. He could be a big player for Ireland going forward. It's a great story. I think everyone in Cove Pirates will be unbelievably proud that they're about to have a senior Ireland international. And like I think back to how well he played in Toulon for Munster a few weeks ago. For a man so big, Will, he's unbelievable at the breakdown in terms of the body positions that he puts himself in. And I think the time that he has spent in camp, you know, in the build-up to Portugal, he was there in Paris last week. I think that will really stand to him in terms of when he comes off the bench this weekend, and I'd imagine he'll make a really good impact. I'm very excited to see that too.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the better second rows over the ball. Like, he gets more turnovers for sure than the majority of second rows in Ireland that you'll see play week in, week out in the URC. Lastly, then, how do you see Saturday going after seeing this team selection? Like, Italy have named their team. No Brex, no Campoazzo as well, which is huge. Like, he'd been named the travelling squad, so the idea was that he would be back fit to Toulouse Flier, but he's not there as well, so doesn't look quite as formidable as it did when that squad was announced. I expect Ireland to win, but it's just how they play which is fascinating to me. Like, this needs to be like kind of a restoring victory and a restorative performance. Like, if it's like the Japan game in November, say, where they won and ended up winning comfortably, but it was not a good performance after the All Blacks game, and it kind of set the tone maybe for what was to come. I know they bounced back against Australia but finished poorly against South Africa, so like if they go and they win and it's underwhelming, the prospect of Twickenham will loom large. But if the excitement in this team selection that we touched on there, if Balakoon goes well, if Lowe with a kick in the arse looks back to his best, if the power of that back five tell a lot, and if the Dogbo and Timothy come in and they bring a lot, all of a sudden things are looking that little bit more positive. So how do you see it playing out?
You're giddy, Will. I can sense the. You're ready.
100%. Like this Italy game is not the Italy game of old. Like this, Ireland have won the last 7 games against Italy at home in the Six Nations by at least 32 points. Like this is not how I envisage this going. This feels like a really important game for this team. As you said, I get 100% what you meant with your comment piece earlier in the week. Like it's Italy. It's not do or die, but how they play and how they look. That's why the team selection was important, because it's a key jumping off point after what we saw last week, I think.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. If it goes well, then all of a sudden, I think the complexion of how Farrell will look at his team for Twickenham and going forward completely flips in his head. Conversely, if Ireland are poor, and which has happened in the past when he's made a lot of changes, they've kind of been clunky is his favourite word that he's used. If that happens this week and we don't see a response to what happened in Paris, then I would start to panic a little bit more. I know there's been a lot of doom and gloom around over the last week. I'm certainly reserving judgment until the end of the Six Nations, unless of course Ireland lose one of their home games in between. But on Italy, you're right. This Italy team is probably the best Italian team to come to Dublin, even without Brex and Capowazzo. I would imagine Capowazzo probably still isn't fully fit. The fact he isn't even on the bench. Brex is a huge loss. They put Leandro Marin into the centre with Menincello, who 23 years old, is one of the best centres in the world, linked to be going to Toulouse, isn't he, next season? An unbelievable player. The pace he showed to score that try last week was outstanding. So they have serious threats across the board. They did a complete number on Scotland's line-out last week, which we kind of didn't touch on either. Ireland's line-out was excellent in Paris, but Italy are going to feel like they can get after Ireland at the line-out. You mentioned the scrum. These aren't things we normally associate with Italian rugby, but they gave South Africa a run for their money at the scrum as well. So this is a really tough challenge. The last time I had a look at the spread, it was 19 points to Ireland, which, to be honest, it's
crazy.
I was shocked.
I think it's 17 now, and that still feels too high. Yeah.
Well, if Ireland were to win by 17 or more points, that would be an unbelievably good day at the office. And I think it would set them up really well going to Twickenham, because as much as I fully expect Ireland to win this weekend, I agree with you. They need the performance as well to match. And I think if they do get a win and they do get a good performance, I said it on our pod last week, that I wouldn't rule out Ireland causing an upset at Twickenham. And I know people think I'm absolutely mad to say that, but England are so sort of cock-a-hoop at the moment that obviously we'll see what happens against Scotland this weekend, but they could be ripe for an ambush. But I think that ambush will only potentially happen if Ireland restore a bit of confidence this weekend, a bit more slick in attack, more passes sticking, more of a counter-attacking threat. Because like I said, I would imagine Italy are going to come after Ireland in the air. Andrew Goodman has spoken about that they want to be the best aerial team in the world. They certainly weren't last weekend, but that they want to be a better team on the counter-attack, which to me is fascinating, because I think if you have guys like Balakoon in your back three in particular, then you can become a seriously good counter-attacking team. So I'm excited. I'm really excited. I think Italy will give Ireland a really good run for their money, but I'm expecting a big response, particularly after Farrell publicly called out his players' lack of intent. He's wielded the axe. He's dropped some really big players for him. And I think everyone will be on edge in terms of the guys who were playing in the best possible way. They shouldn't have needed it to be round 2 of the Six Nations to have that jolt. I mean, I'm just shocked still how off the pace they were in Paris last week. But it's a wake-up call that they didn't want, but perhaps one that would ensure that they're in a better position, hopefully going to Twickenham next week.
Well, that sets the scene nicely for Saturday, 2:10, Ireland versus Italy. A big thanks to Cian for joining me on today's episode of the Left Wing Podcast, sponsored by Energia. Himself, Rudd and Sinead will be at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday. There'll be a podcast in the feed after that. So until then, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.